We turn now to the next object in this, I guess, clustered around this whole issue, which is the tendency for abuse survivors and citizens to blame themselves rather than question the power structure. And this is, of course, completely understandable because the message that many of us receive as part of the abuse is that if we don't want the abuse to get worse, we have to not talk about it. We have to suppress our feelings about it. We have to, in some cases, even pretend it's wonderful. I remember my father dragging me around the house and up and down stairs in a sack. I'm, 5 years old? And then he's like, "Isn't this fun?" It's like, "Sure, Dad, it's great fun. Why don't you get in the sack, you fucking coward, and we'll drag you around in a sack and ask you how that is." You know, there's an interesting schizophrenia in this pattern of abuse someone and then ask them to say that it wasn't so bad. Oh, it wasn't that bad. And this is the classic example. I'm angry about this. Well, it wasn't that bad. I didn't do anything. All I did was drag you around in a sack and have a good time. What's the big deal? All I did was say this, and this that hurt your feelings. All I did was, and so there's this actual message that there's something wrong with an abuse survivor for having feelings about the abuse and not being more easygoing. So we have this pattern, and the healthy response to this coping mechanism is, first of all, remove ourselves, if at all possible, from the abuse. This is one reason that I'm really big on independence within my personal relationships. I want a woman capable of taking care of herself in a high quality of life, so that the only reason she's with me is that she'd rather be with me than do anything else that she could be doing at the time. She'd rather be with me than any other person. She'd rather be here than any other place. And someone with a certain amount of autonomy can do that. The money, the savings, the life skills, etc. And so I think it creates an enormous amount of health to encourage that direction. My relationship right now, I've often been with women older than me where that's not such an issue. My relationship right now, younger than me, and still learning life skills. So that's part of the requirement of being in relationship. I want to see that every week you're using the buffer that this relationship and my resources are providing for you, the buffer between you and reality, you and, a world that demands money by the hour for you to exist. And I want to see that you're growing in that capacity as opposed to shrinking. So what business books are you reading? What are you learning? What are you doing? How are you investing in time, money, effort to grow your business, learn about business, etc., so that that every month you're in relationship with me, you are more competent to learn and grow and take care of yourself than you've ever been in your life. Because then after, let's say a 6-year relationship or however long it lasts, if you say, "Oh, I'm ready for a change," you will have the power to do it. Or if I develop an addiction, I'm talking about a substance addiction as opposed to an addiction to obsessively doing things from time to time. If I develop an addiction or something, then you have the ability to take care of yourself. Or if I get sick, maybe you have the ability to take care of me. Or if, so there's a movement towards the freedom that comes with a symmetry of power, and part of that symmetry of power is confidence that comes with experience. We're building that. Part of the symmetry is resources. We're building that. Part of it is skills, and we're building that. And so with both of us developing skills in all of those areas, the relationship moves towards freedom. And you don't have choice until you have freedom. You might think it's a choice, but if you have the choice of live in a penthouse and have someone take care of you, or go out in the street and feel helpless, numb, and broke, that's not really a choice. It's penthouse, whatever it takes. And so that's not a choice. So to facilitate freedom, there has to be a choice. For there to be a choice, you have to have a viable alternative. And it's cultivating that the viable alternative that's important. Now, back to this tendency of of citizens, of students, of children, and of abuse survivors to blame themselves for the faults of the power structure. This is incredibly common, and it has to be broken in order to lift a lot of the shame, because what our cultures typically do is they fail to educate us, fail to take care of us, fail to protect us, facilitate a variety of mental, emotional, physical dis-ease, and then hold us accountable. It's like, well, it's your life, do whatever you want. It's like, I don't quite think it's that simple. Now, one of the reasons and ways that one of the reasons I think that, and one of the ways that we can see that is, for example, let's say that you have this scenario that everyone is completely a choice, meaning it's just everyone's just waking up and deciding, would I like to be a violent person? Everyone's waking up and saying, would I like to be addicted to so-and-so? Everyone's waking up and saying, do I feel like being poor? And for some reason, in certain situations, a whole bunch of people choose to be violent, addicted, and poor. And then in other situations, other people, for some mysterious reason, choose to be rich and happy and fulfilling and all that. But it's not that simple. We know statistically that, for example, when the unemployment rate goes up in the United States, abuse goes up, debt goes up, violence to children goes up, addiction goes up. Conflict in marriages break up. So there's a correlation. So on the one hand, you have everyone free to choose to be married or not. You have people free to gamble or not, free to, compulsively overeat or not. You have people's freedom to choose on the one hand. On the other hand, we have this scientific fact that says when the employment rate goes from 97% down to 90%, to six more people per 100 that do not have a job, that the reality is that marital conflict, this and that, goes up. Now, that seems to suggest not that suddenly there's a whole bunch of people choosing to be violent, abusive, addictive, and overweight, or whatever the correlation may be, but rather that external influences. If you can imagine a person walking up the street, Now, are they choosing to walk up the street? You could say, sure, he doesn't have to walk up the street, so he's choosing to walk up the street. Nice day, calm day, etc. He's walking up the street. But now he's chosen to walk up the street and there's a 10-mile-an-hour breeze. Now there's a 20-mile per breeze. And if you take 1,000 people who all choose to walk up the street, somewhere between 40 miles per hour and 3,000 miles per hour, the street empties. Not because a single one of those 1,000 people decided they didn't want to walk up the street, but rather the environment became so hostile towards their first choice that they could not continue. So we started 1,000 people. By the time you've got a 40-mile-per-hour wind, let's say it's down to 500 people who still want to walk up the street against a 40-mile-per-hour wind. Now up to 60 mile per hour, maybe we're down to 200 people. Now we're up to 80 miles per hour. Maybe there's 10 people. Now we go up to 200 miles per hour, and maybe there's one person crawling themselves from gutter to curb, etc., up the street because he's got to take care of his his dying to get there. So we're up there at, one person. By the time the wind is 500 miles per hour, the person is literally taken off. Their choice doesn't matter in an environment that is that hostile to that choice. Now, you can go into hypotheticals as much as you want, but they're statistically irrelevant, meaning an intelligent culture must turn its attention to the environment and that environment's level of hostility towards a given choice. Now, you do the same thing to children. You can say to a child, you're free to tell the truth. I won't hurt you. Now, you say this to a child who's never been beaten, who's never been glared at, who's never been shaken, who's never been traumatized, who's never been punished for telling the truth, and they will just blurt out exactly what they're feeling and saying. But you say this, you take 1,000 kids in the room, and you put them through a protocol where every time they tell the truth about their abuser, they are punished, beaten, shamed, threatened with their life, etc., etc. Suddenly it goes down from 1,000% down to maybe 10. So we've got 1,000 kids. Now maybe 10 are willing to brave it. And it depends on the skill of the listener. It's not if you give them a clipboard or if their abuser is with them. So there's all kinds of environmental circumstances. There are environments that are so hostile to the truth in abusive environments that not a single child out of 1,000 will tell the truth in those environments. And there are environments that are so friendly to the truth, so welcoming and honoring of the child, that all 1,000 will excitedly say everything and all things and enjoy the attention. And the question is not what's different about those children. The question is what's different about the environment. They're all at choice, but some choices are obviously a lot more intelligent and survival-oriented than others, depending on the environment. So where does one look then at, if we turn the shame and self-blame outward and look at the various sources of pain, trauma, and abuse, where do we look? Well, for example, we take a 360-degree view of all of the variables that affect a given statistical outcome. So in the United States, 20% of people are lonely. Large percentage of people don't have a single friend where they can fully confide in. 1 in 3 domestic partners, you have domestic violence. 1 in 7 Americans has a substance addiction. A majority of Americans have a compulsion to keep busy, work, etc., to avoid feelings. 90% or more of Americans are chauvinistic. Even if they honor women, they are honoring the masculine traits of women, the women who can be just as badass as a man, as opposed to the deep femininity, the spontaneity, the grace of either the man or the woman. So you have a number of atrocious statistics relative to optimal. What's optimal? No one beats each other. No one calls each other shameful names. No one raises their voice. No one beats their child. No one kicks the dog. I mean, that's optimal. I mean, how many dogs would you like to be kicked? 0 or 20%? I mean, we in an optimal culture, all media consumed is educational, leads to transcendence and growth, is enjoyable, and brings people together. Okay, or what would you think? Should 99% of the media be positive and 1% be toxic, or 10% be toxic? Like, what's the ideal ratio? And what is positive media? Well, what do you want to happen? Do you want people to engage and feel stronger, or do you want people to feel scared and divided? Well, what's the media doing? So when you break down an environment, you start with optimal. This is what an optimal culture and community and experience and life and childhood looks like. Now, this is a little bit tricky because optimal has been brainwashed in by the culture. If the culture says people who know math are really great, there will be a sense of, oh, we're learning more math. That's great. But this needs to be examined in the scrutiny of a cultural, truth, which is that cultures rarely put the well-being of their people ahead of their dogmas. So, for example, we have an entire school curriculum teaching mathematics, algebra, etc., and we have 0 teaching of emotions. Is that really intelligent? So if we then scan segment by segment, what is this environment delivering? So optimal media would do this. Our media does this. How many thousands of percent is it apart from optimal? Because that's the thousands of percent of headwind against the choice. Meaning, let's say you want to choose to be positive and optimistic. And you want to be positive and optimistic. Okay. So you say, let's all watch the news. So you take 1,000 people who want to be positive and optimistic. You put all 1,000 people and sit them down in front of the TV and say, now watch this news. And then you'll say, how many of you feel more positive and optimistic as a result of watching the news? Anyone? 1, 2, 3? Okay, this isn't doing it, is it? So do we want positive or optimistic, or do we want adrenaline tear-jerk addiction followed by advertising for things that we don't want because we've learned in brain chemistry that adrenaline addiction hooks people and violence and exaggerated this and that does the job. It just doesn't happen to make anyone really feel good. It just makes newspaper and TV companies rich. That's true. So what's our goal? Positive and optimistic people or rich owners of TV companies? Well, so if you segment it out, okay, we want people that know how to cook excellent and healthy food. We want people who can listen. We want people that can have loving marriages. And we want people who know how to treat each other right, to keep a fair ledger about, honest interactions and exchanges. I loaned you this, you're going to give it back on this day. We want people capable of doing this. We want people capable of building wonderful dwellings for themselves that are environmentally sustainable. We want people capable of driving safely on the road. So we're going to send them to school to not learn any of this. No. You're going to learn a whitewashed history that masks the shadow of your country. You learn algebra, which who knows when that's going to be of good, but that's what you're going to do. You're going to learn 200-year-old English literature in a not very enjoyable way. You're going to learn to be bullied and humiliated and that it doesn't pay to raise your hand if you don't want to be laughed at. You're going to learn to suppress your creativity. You're going to learn to do what you're told. And you're going to come out knowing very little in the way of life skills. At $5,000 a year to the cost of the public, and the whole time you're developing your emotions and sexuality, we are going to keep you so flooded with homework that you can't possibly do an intelligent job of understanding what you feel or how to express it. So how many 1,000% is that separate from, the breakdown? Now, this is important to understand because you and I didn't design the school system. You and I didn't choose these parents. You and I didn't choose to be born into this cult. You and I didn't choose how the cult was designed. You and I didn't choose the diet that was available at most of the restaurants. You and I didn't decide the design of many of the jobs. You and I didn't decide that we'd travel around and work based on income rather than, enjoyment and team. You and I didn't decide to grow up in an emotionally illiterate culture. That was decided by the generation that came before us. And that has shaped 80 to 90% of who we are today as a statistical probability field. And these assholes up here who are imposing these structures regardless of data, meaning there's plenty of data that says that no maternity leave increases trauma for children. So let's just have no maternity leave. There's plenty of data that shows that shareholder value as the dominant drive in corporate decisions in a workaholic nation demoralizes, lays off, etc. workers. So let's do that. There's plenty of data that shows we're not learning what we need to be learning to prepare for a life of healthy well-being. So let's just do that anyway. This is a process that requires a change in the environment. There's nothing wrong with the people. There's something wrong with the policies and the protocols. And if we can own that, there's nothing wrong with the people. There's something wrong with the protocols and the environment. But that it is up to us to, one, diagnose the environment, to understand what optimum is. I mean, if you can't imagine and feel confident in your imagination, fly to Denmark, have a look. Fly to Thailand, have a look. Fly to Mexico, have a look. I just watched a travel documentary, and it doesn't surprise me that the travelers were reduced to tears, not by the Mexican immigration, not by the Canadian immigration, but by the United States immigration twice. Sociopathic. How about having a look? How about learning? How about stepping outside? How about doing some data crunching? So it's not hard to find examples all around the world of better ways of doing things. And it's not hard if the priority is the health and well-being of the next generation, of the country, etc., to adopt them. But once the message has been deeply ingrained that it's not about people, it's not about feelings, it's not about well-being, it's about imposing a dominant patriarchal value system, regardless of data and facts, it becomes, first of all, you're dealing with a sociopathic generation because that's how they've been treated, and that's a sociopathic way to treat a human being. So it becomes very difficult. But as we move into the power structure, there is an opportunity. It's not a very high one statistically, because when you've been abused your whole life, treating someone well actually brings that pain a bit to the surface, because you see the contrast. This is what it's like to treat someone well, and this is how I've been treated. So when you treat someone better than you've been treated, it creates a gap, and that gap creates grief, because you start to realize as you watch their smile and their happiness that you could have been treated that way, and you would have felt that way too. But you never did, because your power structure was more interested in the dogma of whatever it is they were focused on, getting you to smile when you weren't happy, ignoring your feelings, saying how wonderful your parents were when they've just been murdering your soul. We don't care about that. Just make us look good, So it's a sociopathic treatment. So this is the medicine, to turn it outward, to look at our specific sphere of influence, and to start holding power structures accountable to the responsibilities and trust by which they have been given. Power structures that affect these statistics much more than we do. Now, that's not to say that, because, there's a couple of ways to work with this. One way is to say, okay, I'm not going to do anything, and it's all their fault. And I'll just sit around and, just give up, because there's a 96% chance that someone like me who's experienced this will just be depressed forever, and so I'll just resign to being depressed forever. No, hold the power structures accountable. Notice the odds that they've given you. For example, in education, you have a 2% odds of coming out of the Western education system highly creative, highly motivated, highly productive, and knowing yourself and learning and growing and enthusiastic about learning. 2% is the probability that you'll come out of the education system that way. But 98% of kids go into the education that way. Creative, willing to make mistakes, imaginative, excited about things. What about this? What about this? Only 2% come out. So, okay, so you have a 98% chance of feeling, bored, self-loathing, uncomfortable, not very interested in learning, etc., coming out of our school system. Well, sure, fight to be part of the 2%, but also knowing that statistic, consider doing what I did, which is a homeschool program, which was exceptionally exciting with exceptionally useful topics, and which continues to this day, because I was excited about all I learned, and I'm still excited about all that I am learning. And so it just continues year after year after year, learning new stuff. It's great. I don't recommend playing if you have the choice. For example, if you have a gambling choice where you can put down $10 and there's a 98% chance you're going to lose that $10, and there's a 2% chance that you'll just keep the $10. So you put down $10 and there's a 2% chance you'll get to keep it. And there's a 98% chance you're going to lose it. That's not a good bet. Don't do it. Play at a board where there's a 90% chance that your enthusiasm, curiosity, growth, and intelligence will grow, and just a 2% chance it'll get worse. Play at that board game. So you have to know the statistics to know where to play. And this is very important, because dogmatic situations don't like comparisons. The United States doesn't like comparing itself to Denmark, so I have to fly over to Copenhagen and interview them over there, and then interview people here and realize what the statistical difference is. And so if at all possible, move to a board game where you have a probability of winning. If at all possible, invent a game where you are certain to win. And if not possible at the present time, then fight like hell to be part of the small minority of winners. Like, this culture produces about 1% of highly sustainable, loving, healthy, balanced, contributing individuals who love their lives, love their job, love their environment and friends and country, and do this sustainably. So, okay, great. So fight to be part of that 1%. But don't hold yourself accountable because you didn't create those rules. And have compassion for yourself that you've been given an odds against you that you're going to have to run really, really hard. Not because there's anything wrong with you. Not because there's anything wrong with any of those people that are not going to make it. But because there's something wrong with a system where more than 98% of the people are losing in key ways and don't even know what they don't know. So they don't know why they're losing, and they just feel bad about themselves or grumble, but it doesn't shift. Their grumbling isn't loud enough to actually change the power structure that measures the statistic. There's only one good measure of a leader, and that is, does the trust, the money, and the power that we give to you dramatically lead to a change in the statistic? When we give you money and trust and deferential leadership and authority, does spousal abuse go down? Does childhood trauma go down? We have to measure it first to know if it's going up or down. Does loneliness go down? Does well-being go down? Does obesity go down? Does health go down? And are you someone that galvanizes the information and disseminates it in a way that empowers people to act, challenges and motivates people to act, and that measurable results consistently occur under your leadership? And if not, we don't need you. You're just a pompous ass sitting up on top of a throne somewhere doing nothing useful. And you don't deserve the trust, and you don't deserve the money, you don't deserve the time, you don't deserve the differential treatment or the salary or the title. It should be earned based on results. Results on how people are doing mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, and spiritually relative to their values. Thanks for watching.